If you really want to get faster on your bike without buying expensive upgrades, then training smartly is the best way. And there are different ways to measure your improvement in fitness over time. There are power meters, there are heart rate sensors, and simply how you feel. But which is right for you? What's the difference between power, heart rate, and perceived effort? Well, in today's video, I'm joined by pro cycling coach Andy Turner to find out what's what. And we started by talking about the difference between power, heart rate, and RPE.
Power is a measure of your external workload that you are putting out. So the external workload is what work comes from the work you are doing internally. So propulsion for on the bike. But that internal workload is then the heart rate. So how hard is everything working inside to generate that work? So obviously lower heart rate is working less, higher heart rate is working more internally. And that's where you see things like, for example, if you can produce more power for the same heart rate, then you've become more efficient because internally it's working the same, but it is producing more energy, more force, more power. So that's a good thing. And then RPE, rate of perceived exertion, is just subjective measures of how you feel yourself. So power and heart rate are objective measurements. They are what they are. They are what are being measured, whereas RPE is that subjective. So that's how you are feeling. So yeah, they're all quite different, but they all have their specific place within being useful for training.
How do you know which one to use for training? Which one do you choose?
I would say the best case scenario is using all of them together, because you get quite a few issues if you use one with the exclusion of others in terms of looking for accurate data. So if you use only your power, you have no idea how hard you're actually working internally. So if you ride at 200 watts, are you at 120 beats per minute or are you 180 beats per minute? I mean, you can get an idea of that by the thudding sensation in your chest, but it doesn't tell you what your body is doing to produce this workload. It's leaving out a massive amount of data. And in the same way with heart rate, it's then, okay, this is the heart rate, but what is it actually resulting in? You don't know what the actual power from that is. I mean, some people use speed, and you can see then higher heart rate probably is getting a higher speed, or you've got a loop that you do consistently and the speed increases but the heart rate remains the same. But then you've got variables like weather conditions, which is where power can help sort of put a physiological understanding as to what work you're doing for the work that's happening inside. And then RPE as well can vary day to day. If you're feeling particularly tired from work or the ride the day before, the session might feel harder, but you're actually not working particularly hard. Or you might have great legs and you feel that the session is really easy, but you're actually working way too hard for what you're meant to be doing. And the next day you're going to suffer for it. So all of them have pros and cons, but then when you use them all together, that's kind of where the magic happens. So you've got your ride at 120 beats per minute and 200 watts, and it feels good. You feel strong, you don't feel like the effort's too high. Great, good session. Now let's say the heart rate is a bit lower and you feel really strong. Then that could show that you are getting fitter because you're working less internally to get more external. But then we change that heart rate to being higher and you've still got the good feeling. Maybe you're just fit, you're feeling fresh. So there's more heart rate responsiveness and it's working a little bit harder at the moment, but maybe you're just well rested. But then you've sort of got the inverse of if you're not feeling great during those, it could mean something different. So if you've got the high power, low heart rate feeling bad, perhaps you're a little bit over fatigued because that can suppress heart rate. So maybe you need to take a bit more rest, or maybe the heart rate is higher and you don't feel good. Maybe you've got the early onset of illness because your body's fighting something off. It's having to work harder to fight off an illness while producing that power. So that's why using all three in conjunction can give you quite a lot more detail on what's actually going on. It's why keeping a training diary is useful as well, because if you can look back and go through your training plan and think, right, here's the week up to when I know I got ill, and I can see that my heart rate started going up relative to my power, and my feeling on the rides was getting worse and worse. I was feeling each session was getting harder, and then I got ill. So you can kind of look back and think, oh, that trend is happening again. Maybe I should back off and not do these intervals tomorrow, just in case I've got an illness, and you might avoid then having to have a week off the bike.
RPE is free. Heart rate monitors are fairly inexpensive. Power meters are expensive, but become more accessible and more bikes being spec with them. So if you're starting out, RPE, is it enough to get fitter?
I'd say the big thing, if people are just starting out, it's riding your bike more. So RPE is a good way of doing it. RPE and how much fun you're having, frankly, is the best way to go if you're just starting off. You don't need to be investing in all of these data metrics, because it gets a little bit obsessive and too much, because obviously then you've got heart rate monitors, maybe 40 quid for a decent one of those. Adds a bit more information onto the data there, and then power meters, you're looking at starting price probably £200 for something like a SRAM dub crankset one or a 4i single-sided. You can go up to over 1,000, whether that's dual-sided setups and all sorts, and all of it gives a bit more data. But you've got to be careful in terms of how much data you end up driving everything from, because you see sort of the Whoop bands now, and I get people saying like, oh yeah, I felt great this morning, but my Whoop band said I wasn't recovered, so I didn't do the session. It's sort of like, well, how did you feel? Felt great, could have done it. Or the other way, the Whoop band says they're recovered, and in reality, they feel terrible and they shouldn't be doing the session. And that's where that RPE element of things, having a bit of intuitive thought about how you feel, is really useful, rather than just relying on all of these objective measures. And obviously now you can get sweat sensors, breath monitors, and body temperature sensors and all sorts. So I'd say you can definitely train effectively with just RPE. There are plenty of cyclists of years gone by who have gone on to do great things using just the way they felt. Obviously the training's become more advanced with heart rate monitors, power meters, lactate measurements and all sorts. But you don't need all of that to get as good as you can do, really. I mean, obviously at the top end where you're searching for these minute percentages, then yes, it's going to make a difference. But for most of us, we can all train pretty comfortably off RPE, then incorporating heart rates, and then power, I'd say would be the order of doing it, which works quite nicely in terms of the expense that comes with them as well.
So more data is good, but too much data can be overwhelming and confusing if you don't know how to interpret data on your own.
Yeah, exactly that point. And that's where quite often a coach can be useful, is someone who can understand and explain that data, what it means to you, but also where the experience comes in, hopefully from a coach, that they can also help you get a better understanding of your feeling around how you are on the bike. So rather than just relying on the watts or just the heart rate or just those, it's combining it with the feeling to understand the sort of broader picture. So it's quite common that you see people get used to using power and heart rates, and they kind of forget to rely on how they feel, like with that example with the Whoop bands, where data is driving their decisions rather than how they actually feel. And that's where I think it's very important to help actually with athletes understand that that's a subjective feeling is incredibly important, and sometimes it's training people to get better at using that.
Something else that helps you ride faster is today's sponsor, FTP Endurance Fuel. I'm a big fan of this product and used it at Badlands last year, and it really helped me out. And there are two things I really like. First of all, it's a squidgy energy chew block that's both easier to digest than a energy bar, and nicer and less sickly and messy than a gel. And then to cut down on individual waste and wrapping, you get one big bag like that and a small bag like this, and you put as many as you need for a ride from the big bag into a small bag. So help cut down waste, and that's no bad thing at all. And right now, you lucky viewers can get 15% off the price of a packet of energy chews right now at the website linked down below. Does RPE really matter when you have a power meter on your bike? I'm pretty sure many people just focus on power to the exclusion of all our feedback.
Yeah, exactly that. So recently I've got a guy that I coach who's at university, and there's been some exams recently and some late nights that are university induced, and get to a training session like a VO2 max session and just not able to hit the power on those efforts. And it's then sort of like, right, I'm not able to hit these, what should I do? Should I just try and persist because I can't hit the power or the heart rate to get the training stimulus from this session, and I'm just going to tire myself out more. So he messages and I say, no, just spin easy for the rest of it, head back, stretch, rest up, and we'll get back to it later in the week. Later in the week, come to the session, feels good, able to hit everything absolutely fine. So it's that sort of thing of, if he tried to hit that session earlier in the week, it would have just added to his stress, and maybe then it would have compromised the session later in the week as well. But sort of understanding how you're feeling and thinking, right, I'm not feeling good on this, I'm not actually able to hit the numbers I need to do, I'm going to bin those efforts off, recoup, and get a consistent session in 2 days' time. It's not based on the power and the heart rate, it's based on how you feel, and that results in more consistent and more effective training.
So RPE isn't a sexy, expensive upgrade, but it sounds like it's underrated and something we should all invest more time in actually listening to.
Yeah, it's sort of an essentially kind of mindfulness, really, a training mindfulness, which I think is still quite important to have that ability to sort of innately understand how you are feeling on the bike and in a session. It's like some of the best time trialists you see can flatline a power figure without actually looking at their power meter. They don't look at what is there, they just go on what they know they can feel and sustain for that entire period. So I used to do a 10-mile time trial at Abergavenny, the R1017 for time trialists watching. And week in, week out, I would consistently hit about 370, 371 without ever looking at the power meter, and just do flat-lined power each time.
You have your RPE and power so closely aligned in terms of the sensation getting back.
Yeah, so I was more of a time trialist type rider, so that was sort of what I was good at doing, was knowing how I felt in terms of my pace and what could be sustained long term.
It's assumed that power meters are only for the pros, but can amateur normal cyclists benefit from a power meter?
I think yes, there is benefit to it because, as we mentioned, like the heart rate might change, but it's understanding what workload you're putting out for that. So if your heart rate stays the same and the power goes up, you can see progress. And a lot of the time, seeing something that can be quantified as progress can help with motivation. So you upgrade your wheels or your tires and suddenly you're going a kilometre an hour quicker. It makes you feel good because you're seeing that progress. And in the same way over winter, I've switched to winter tyres now, and every ride is slower. And it can be a little bit demoralising, but I can see the heart rate, I can see the power, I can see that that's improving. And then I put the race wheels on a weekend ago for a reliability ride and was going much faster, still the same power and heart rate, nothing had changed there, but the speed had increased. So the sort of seeing where the power and heart rate are and how they correlate, it can be quite good motivation through the winter, sort of like knowing that the training you're doing this on the turbo or out on the road in the foul weather is contributing to increased performance, even when you can't see speed increases on the road. So some of it's just in terms of adding the motivation for training through a long winter, getting into the summer and getting back on your race bike and being quicker than you were last year.
With each of these measuring tools, I guess, is there a standard zone, a way to figure out how to use RPE, heart rate, like max heart rate, for example, and then power meter in terms of FTP test or zones? How do you get into the detail of each one to make the most of it, I guess? Yeah,
so that's where it becomes sort of, there's lots of different ways of doing it. RPE, there's a metric used in sports science, I think it's the Borg scale, which is 6 to 20. So it starts at 6, finishes at 20, and it kind of correlates with heart rates. So 6 is very easy, 60 beats a minute, which for most people would be incredibly light exercise, whereas 20 is 200 beats per minute, which is absolutely all out. I quite like just the 1 to 10 scale, but then it's different people will rate different things in different ways. So someone's super easy might be 2, someone else's might be 4, or someone doing a zone 2 ride, it might be 5, and that's their feeling really easy. So it's using a scale, but as long as you're consistent with it is kind of the main thing. Heart rate, people will use percentage of max heart rate or percentage of threshold heart rate. it varies in how they do that. In the same way with power, you might base it on FTP derived from a ramp test, or from 20 minutes, or from 60 minutes, or it's a critical power test from a 3-minute all out, or it's a 3 and 12, or it's a 3, 6 and 12, or you're doing lactate thresholds. There's many different ways you can assess where to base your power and heart rate and rate of perceived exertion zones off. The key is being consistent with it. So if you're doing FTP from a ramp test, always do the ramp test, because if you did it from a 20-minute test, you'll probably have a very different result. But if you're doing the same test, you can track and see progress and improvement. It's in the same way some power meters might not actually be accurate. They might read lower, because if you've got a pedal power meter, it's reading the force at the pedal. There's a little bit of force lost through the crank, through the chain rings, the chain, the cassette, the hub. So if you have a power meter that's a hub-based one, like the old power taps, they always used to read low. Or even with turbo trainers now, it's all measured at the hub. So if you've got a drivetrain efficiency loss of 3%, and that's on a clean chain, 3% of the power will read lower at the rear than it will at the pedal, for example. And then if the chain gets dirty, it will read even less. So that's why you want to be consistent, because even if the power meter is not right, because you see a lot of numbers nowadays where I think there are some people miscalibrating power meters.
On purpose? On purpose?
Yeah, to get some headline numbers that sound flashy. But as long as you're consistent with what you're doing, that's how you'll track the progress. The worst thing is if you have a power meter that's not consistent, because it's completely useless at that point. I remember people used to joke that the first generation Stages was just a random number generator. Ironically enough, I had one that was very consistent with other power meters and lasted for years. Or there's, I don't know whether to name drop some power meters that I've definitely heard are notoriously inaccurate or not, but there's one that a lot of World Tour teams use that is known for being really, really inaccurate and bad. And it's absolutely beggars belief that they bother using it, because it's just not giving them any useful data. But yeah, you want consistency. So in the same way with heart rate monitors, you can get straps on the chest, which are more accurate the more you sweat. But that's why they often say put a bit of water on them, because it's reading the electrical impulse. Or you have wrist or arm ones, which are based on infrared light seeing the blood flowing through the capillaries, but they become less accurate the more you sweat. So you want to get something that's going to be consistent and read consistently within itself, even if it's not 100% accurate.
So hopefully you now have a better understanding of how to smartly track your fitness improvements over time with power, heart rate and perceived effort. And if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to drop them down below. And to find out more about Andy's coaching business and services he offers, his website is linked down below as well. And make sure to check out today's sponsor, FTP Endurance, with a 15% discount for you lucky viewers, linked down below. But that is all for today. Happy training, and I'll see you again very, very soon.